One of the questions facing an artist is, what is the relationship between what I see and the painting I create? One response to that question was made by Edouard Manet, the famous French painter, described as the artist who catapulted painting into the 20th century. Manet said, "When you paint, try to put down exactly what you see. Paint the truth, and do not worry about what people say." And he added, "Depicting reality can become prosaic. Reality must not just be looked at, but lived and set ablaze in a flash of recognition." Winslow Homer, the American painter, felt the same and believed that an artist's emotions are revealed in a faithfully painted picture. An admirer of Manet and Winslow Homer, and a leading artist in America, Margaret Holland Sargent has received widespread recognition, including selection as cover artist for American Artist magazine. She also teaches art at the National Artist Seminar.
Today, we're going to define value. You really must understand value, which is the lightness and darkness of a color, in order to create a feeling of depth and form in your work. The famous French post-impressionist artist Cézanne advocated painting stovepipes as a first step. My first oil painting teacher, Herbert Abrams, had his students paint an egg. And I think that's an excellent way to learn value, which means you can create a form and you get a sculptured look to your work. The second exercise will be painting fruit, and then we'll utilize the other hued colors on the palette. Let's take a look at the palette. This chart shows the colors on our palette. There are 14 hued colors. Hue is the name of a color, like in the color wheel, red, yellow, and green. On the left is alizarin crimson. The other colors in this row are all cadmium barium colors: red deep, red medium, red light, orange deep, orange, yellow deep, yellow medium, and yellow light. This orange is the color put out by most manufacturers of oil paint. This is Grumbacher's orange. It has a little more red in it. Cerulean blue is the lightest of the three blues. There's cobalt blue and ultramarine blue, the darkest blue. Phthalo green and viridian complete the hued colors on our palette. There are 8 neutrals. A neutral is a color completely lacking in hue, such as red, blue, or yellow. We have ivory black, permalba white, and 6 shades of gray from number 3 through number 8. Liquitex has saved us a lot of time by manufacturing these 6 shades of gray in a series. You'll notice that number 3 is the same value or lightness and darkness as red deep, as does number 4 to red medium. In the top range, yellow deep and orange have the same value as gray number 7. In summary, these grays are lined up with the other colors on our palette in terms of their value. One example of how to use these grays is to make an object seem round. For instance, if you can visualize this blob of red as being an apple, you could take a touch of this same value gray, number 3, mix it with a little of the red and apply it to the edge, and it will make that apple seem to just go away from the eye. Cerulean blue is just about the same value as gray number 3. The other 2 blues and the 2 greens, as well as alizarin crimson, are all darker in value than number 3. With just the paints on this palette, I'll be able to mix any color I need. Now, let's go take a look at the lighting setup. Not every artist can paint in the studio with a natural north daylight, so they use a basement or some other room and use artificial light. Then they hang up the finished painting in a room and with daylight, and they wonder why it looks too red or orange. Well, it's because you need to correct that, and I've corrected the light by using 150-watt floodlight on the canvas and on my palette, and over that I put a daylight filter that converts the tungsten to daylight blue. And the 150-watt parabolic reflector spot that I use on the still life has one of these filters over it as well. You can buy these daylight blue filters at your photographic supply store. Since the egg is so small, I positioned a small cardboard box underneath the drape to form sort of a mini table. This is the shadow that's cast by the egg onto the drape, and I call that the cast shadow. This is the shadow on the egg itself, and together we call them the general dark. The part of the egg that's in light is called general light. Then the area of the egg that goes from light to dark is one of the most difficult for artists to understand and paint. It's called halftone. The part of the shadow underneath the egg is the darkest shadow and called an accent. And that part of the egg that's nearest to the light source and receiving the strongest amount of light is called the highlight and should occur about here. Now, let's start our sketch on the canvas. I'm going to use a number 2 bristle brush to start my sketch, and one of the lighter neutrals, probably something around 6 or 7, and decide that the composition is a little tricky because you only have the egg there and you don't want to put it dead center. I believe I'll divide this up and have the top of the table about here, and where the drape goes up come about there, and that will put the egg in the lower section. I want to keep it off center a little bit. I'll plan to have the egg reside right here. And we'll think about the cast shadow. I see that coming here. That'll help to balance the composition. And the shadow on the egg itself falls about in this area. And that is part of the general dark I was talking about before. So we'll just mask the general dark area together. That's the shadow on the egg and the cast shadow. At this point, I don't think we need to do too much more sketching. We'll refine the shape as we go along. But the first thing is to mass in the largest areas, work from the back forward, and the dark before the lights. The drape is a neutral gray, about value number 6 on your palette. I've prepared a series of grays for the background using the basic background gray, your gray number 6, the neutral 6, and to that I've added a little cadmium yellow medium in this pile, and in this pile I've added a little cadmium yellow deep, and in this I have added some cadmium barium orange. The reason I do this is because the part of the drape nearest the light, it has the more golden color, and so you use the yellow there. This would be more in the center of the background as it goes away from the light, and the furthest away is the portion with the cadmium orange. To the last one, I'm just going to rapidly put those on. Rapidly put those on. We want to cover this canvas as soon as we can. Using a little copal medium to make that paint flow. Copal also leaves a nice gloss to your paint after it's dry, which is another reason I like painting with copal medium. Instead of thinning my paint with turpentine or paint thinner, which is perfectly all right as long as you don't use too much of it. But I found I was allergic to turpentine, and I prefer the look of copal medium for the final result. So I pretty much stick to that. The area I'm painting now, this is the background drape, has the, it's the variation that I mixed a little orange with. So while I have this on my brush, I'm going to drop down and paint the front of the cloth as it comes forward. It's about the same value gray as the back. I'm squinting my eyes. I think it's a little darker, so I'm going to go down the palette and add a little darker gray. You have to trust your eye sometimes on this. And having those two darks on the canvas will give me a way to judge that the center portion where the light is striking the top of the canvas. Before I leave the area, though, I'm going to darken these corners. Put a little alizarin in that to add life to the gray. Grays can be pretty dull if you don't liven them up sometimes with something. Besides, the light does that for you. As it crosses the surface, you know, it picks up in the colors from gold through orange to red. I'm going to make a decision now on the tabletop, so I see that it's getting a pretty strong light. I'm going to go up a step or two in the grays and try about a number 7. See what that does. Am I happy with that? It might be too light. Well, I'll finish massing it in. Keep your edges loose and overlap when you can so that you don't have sharp lines. I've just gone over the part where the shadow is supposed to fall, so let me decide. I think maybe the light is not too bad near the egg, but I'm going to darken the outer edges. A couple reasons for this. The spotlight really is concentrated on the egg. I think I got it, that top a little bit light to begin with. And the egg itself is reflecting around itself, so it's going to be a little bit lighter. I think maybe I'm happier with that. Which of these grays I'm going to use for the shadow on the egg? I think it's about a 5 or a 6 here. I'll try. It's better to go too dark and lighten it than it is to start too light. That shadow comes about there. Now the cast shadow is going to be darker than the shadow on the egg. Came in around there. I had a drop of alizarin in that cast shadow. The egg itself is a sort of a translucent body, and there's a lot of color in that egg that you might not notice at first. It's really there. So we want to give that as much color as possible, still get the values right. Okay, well, we'll worry about the rest of that later. I want to mass in the general light of the egg. I'm going to mix a little gray, number 7, and a drop of yellow medium just to warm that up a bit. Keeping in mind that you've got to end up with the highlight, and the lightest light you have is white, it's a good idea to start with a darker gray than you think is really necessary, because you can lighten it, as I said, and make it a general mass for the light side of the egg. And now to deal with that pesky halftone, I'll take a little bit of the shadow color, a little bit of the previously mixed general light, and to that I'll add just a touch of cadmium red light, because as you know, when a light travels across an object, it picks up in color. We'll see how that works. Place that about there. Where I'm standing, I can see that shadow just curl around there ever so slightly, around the back of the egg, and up here around the front. We have to refine this edge here. It's a good idea to stand back every once in a while, check from a distance. I'm going to take my background color and work around those edges just a little here. By the way, I'm using a number 4 brush on the egg. I see a dark spot in the drape that I like that right there, because that really draws your eye where you want, where that highlight's going to be later. Darken that right in there. Cross the edge a little bit. Now, start modeling a little bit on the egg here. I want that to really look round, and that's where your grays come in handy. Gray that edge and off it goes. Where the light is strongest, you come up with the grays, pull it right down there, use your neutral to model this side of the light area. Want that feeling of roundness and form happening right in there. Touch as that edge goes down, away from the eye. And I'm going to add a little accent where the shadow originates under the egg. That's the darkest dark right there. And that's where you want the eye to look. When you're looking at an object, you're not particularly seeing the drape, you're looking at the object itself. And it's the painter's job to recreate that experience by leading the eye where you want the viewer to look. The shadow, it has softer edges as it goes away from the egg and away from the light source until it blends out into nearly nothing there. Now we can go up a little bit with our neutrals and start modeling the light side of the egg where it's closest to the light, with that feeling of roundness. I'm using the palest of the grays. Area, the local color, which is the sort of an eggshell, would be a good way to express it. Very near the light, I'm using nearly pure white with just a little bit of the yellow, medium. Carefully placed, so that when you put in your highlight, you can go to pure white, which is the lightest light you have at your command. And even white isn't as light as we see with our eye. So, check that. I think we can use a little more transition between the shadow side and the light side here. I'm not happy with that line. Also, we have to put the reflected light in. The reflected light is what's being reflected up from the drape onto the bottom edge of that egg. And I see it as being almost an orange deep mixed in with that shadow color. Just a touch. You don't want to destroy the unity of the shadow with too much reflected light, and yet it really adds a lot to the painting. It was way too dark. Let's lighten that up. To have that warm glow just on the bottom of the egg that's getting all the light from the drape there. Bring it up carefully. Let's see, to blend in this area here. That egg turning, turning, turning. Well, you could work on an egg as long as you wanted to and still see things to do, but I think basically this should give you an idea of how to use the paints and the values to create a feeling of roundness. There's your egg. The second demonstration will be painting fruit. And for this, I'll be using a slightly larger canvas, 11 inches by 14 inches. Now, let's go take a look at the lighting arrangement and the fruit arrangement. Here's the same 150 watt spot with blue filter lighting our fruit arrangement. Arrangement is important, part of the art. You'll find this a bit more challenging than the egg, with yellow, green, red, orange, and your blue backdrop. And each of these has several shades of colors in it. For instance, I'll be using all 4 reds in the apple. You should experiment with your arrangement until it seems unified and the lights are well distributed and the darks are in a proper position. I arrived at this by doing several thumbnail sketches, which I'll show you later. The banana leads the eye into the center of the arrangement, as does the lemon, and the two yellows sort of balance one another here. The apple is the center because it's receiving the brightest light from the spotlight. The orange, being the largest piece of fruit, is placed a little off-center because it helps form this triangular effect that is nice to have in a still life. And the drapery fold leads the eye right in so that you get the circular effect of the still. Now, let's look at those thumbnail sketches. And here they are. I spent, 4 or 5 minutes on each of these quick thumbnail sketches and finally settled on the upper right because I felt it had that unity that I described to you before, that the others lack. The next step is to make a sketch on the canvas. For this, I'll be using a number 4 bristle brush, a filbert, and a number 7 neutral gray diluted with a little bit of the copal medium. Now, we have to make the decision about the composition as it's placed on the canvas. I think we'll have the table edge about here. We want to leave a border on each side, not go over that area with the fruit. And the fruit probably will occupy the lower third of the canvas. All right. To begin the sketch, I'm going to make just a few very abstract lines so that I can place the fruit about where I want. As I mentioned before, I want it, the center of interest should be in the lower third. So I'll set my apple, and a pear comes in here, lemon, right about that edge, the banana coming in at this angle, and the orange up around here. Make my apple a little bit bigger. So, and the shadow patterns in here. I'm going to change the edge of the table I wanted before. Just take a little bit of my paint thinner, or turpentine if you use turp. Take that line out. At this point in your sketching, if you stay very loose, then you can make the changes without having invested a lot of time. And you'll feel more or less reluctant to make any changes than if you had done a very detailed sketch. Now, I think I'll have my table edge coming down there. So, I'm not going to spend too much more time on the sketching. I want to get right into painting because I'll be modeling with the paint as I go and working back and forth between the edges. So at this point, I'm going to stand back and take a look and see if the sketch does what I want it to. Okay, I think at this point I'm going to add a few of this shadow side of the fruit. That'll give me another feel for the composition that I need before I want to really get in there and start painting. Once I start with the color, I'm pretty well committed. Step after this sketch is going to be, as I mentioned before, the rule of massing in the largest area. And I see that my largest area here is going to be this background drape. So let's mix the colors for the background drape. Here is the mixture that I made for the basic background color. Consists of neutral number 4 with some cerulean hue. And from this I mixed 5 variations, one with cadmium yellow medium, one with a little cadmium orange, and a third with some cadmium red light. The other 2 variations were mixed with black and white. First thing to do is to take my number 12 broad or filbert brush and start massing in that background. Don't be skimpy with the paint, nice and liberal. You're actually painting in what we call the negative area now. And it's nice to have interesting patterns, which we hope we'll get by the shapes of the fruit in this negative area. As I'm painting further away from the light source, I'm using the pile of background color into which I mixed a little of the cadmium red light. It's almost imperceptible, but it does make a difference. The eye will pick it up. And you see in the center portion here, I am using the variation that has the orange in it, cadmium barium orange. And then as we go further to where the light is, I'm dipping my brush in the pile of paint that has the yellow in it, because that's the general progression of light as it crosses an object. That nearest to the light source has more yellow or gold color in it. And as it goes away from the light source, it picks up in the oranges and the reds. I'm being very liberal with this paint, and I'm going over my edges because you want to keep those edges soft. We talked about that. And the tabletop comes in about here. I want to get the banana too close to the edge. And right nearest the fruit, where the light is hitting strongest, we have the very lightest variation. I'll put that quickly in there. And go back to the slightly darker variation as we get out of the range of that spotlight. It's another nice thing the spotlight does. It concentrates the pool of light near the center of interest, allowing us to control that viewing line. Check my proportions. I think I want to bring that lemon down just a tad here. That light extends into that area. We have shadow of the lemon beginning down a little lower. Now I've mixed plenty of this background color because you don't want to run out halfway through and have to stop and mix and maybe not have the same continuity of your series. So I'm going to go now to the laying in the colors of the fruit. I'll change my brush. I think for that I'll use a number 6 filbert. And we'll start, I believe, we'll do the general light. Since it's the largest mass, that orange is the next largest mass in the general light area. There's not that much shadow showing, so I will go ahead and take my orange deep, which you'll remember was the Grumbacher orange, and just lay that nice juicy color right over the area of the orange and down into the shadow just a bit. Let's overlap the edge too of the background. That's softening the edge. It's also graying the edge, which gives it the feeling of the orange going away. Now I'm going to switch to another brush, and I believe I'll do the apple. It seems to be the next largest color. Just mass that in. We'll be working with the other shades of red, but right now the general light seems to be a cadmium red medium for the general light mass. So we'll use that now just to overlap that orange just a bit. Put that brush aside because we'll want to go back to the red later, and we don't want to spend most of our time washing brushes. I picked up another filbert. This is a little bit smaller. This is a 4. Why don't I do the banana? I think the banana color is cadmium yellow deep with a little neutral number 8 mixed in. Let's see how that works. Let's see how that works out. Just as a general light color. I think we hit it on the nose there. Okay. Now I do see the shadow side there. I'm not going to worry about that too much at this point. Well, I think I'll keep this same brush and use it for the lemon. The lemon is a little lighter. There's no one color that seems exactly right, so I'm going to combine cadmium yellow light and a touch of cadmium yellow medium with a little dab of white. We'll try that. Lemons are pretty light colored. I won't go into the shadow side on this because that would present a problem later when I try to, if I tried to cover up that bright yellow. Why don't I mix a little bit of that shadow? I'll use some of the local color plus a little dab of black, but now you'll be able to see how black turns green when it's mixed with yellow. So in order to neutralize that, I'll reach up and take some orange cadmium barium orange, mix in with that till I get what I want for the basic shadow. All right. And I think I'll use a tad of that on the banana where it turns into a little darker color here too. Put the brush aside and we'll think about what's happening in terms of that pear. We have the two choices of greens, the phthalo and viridian. And we can also make the green with black and yellow. I'm going to take a touch of phthalo. I know it's going to be awfully bright, so I'm dropping a little yellow deep in there. And with that, I get a very rich, deep green. Let's see, probably, yeah, that's not bad for the shadow side, but which we're getting a lot of there. But I'm going to put a little white in with that mixture for the part of the pear that's receiving more light. There's a lot of rich colors in that pear. I can see, along with that mixture, adding some of the nice golden quality, which is your yellow deep. And almost to the point where it goes into shadow. I'll go back and dip into my phthalo, where it's a nice rich green there. Of course, as it goes away from the eye, you know that it picks up in a gray. It's away from the light, and so by putting a touch of the same value gray in, we can make that pear appear to go away from the eye. But I'm getting sort of ahead of myself here. I wanted to mass in the whole area before we started modeling. I noticed that the center of the apple has that pale greenish part next to the, right in here. So I'm using the same brush as long as I have that color on the brush and just put it in there. Now put this brush down, pick up another. We're going to mass in the shadow side of these fruits. And first let me pick up a dark background color and use that as the shadow on our drape. Let's add those shadows every other area where they seem to appear and around the pear. The apple and orange. Put the basic shadow behind the lemon, underneath the pear, and under the apple, under the orange, and that little area here where the banana comes around the orange. I can see where I'm going to have to adjust the background color in that area because I have placed that banana a little bit high. As a matter of fact, I think I have the orange up a little higher than I like as well. So, but we can rectify that very simply by going back to that same pile of background color. We know exactly where it is. It's the one that's closest to the light source, so it's the one with all the yellow in it. And we make those adjustments quickly and easily. Switch back to brushes to the number 6 that I'm using for the shadow. And complete the cast shadows. This time the banana. Switching to my orange brush. As I squint my eye, I see that orange comes down a little bit further before the shadow starts, almost to the edge of that banana. At this point, I think the best thing to do would be to put in the shadow, general shadow on the objects themselves. So I'll start again with our orange, the largest of the colored objects. I'll use some cadmium red medium with neutral number 4 to get that general shadow. We'll see how that works, this shadow side. You'll notice I didn't use the orange deep. I went to a darker value of that red series in order to get the shadow color. And just go right over the edges that are already there. The general shadow for that apple is pretty dark. I see it almost as alizarin. Let's try alizarin right in here. As I add these areas, I'm sort of checking with my eye as well to check for placement of the objects. I'm going to dip back into my red medium and give a little better shape to this apple. I'm going to try Viridian in the shadow side of that pear and see what happens. That's a little bit too colorful, so I'll reach up to my gray number 3 or 4. We'll try one of those. See, when you get something that's too rich, you just neutralize it with one of the neutrals in the same value range. It's really quick and helpful. Now, shadows are very rich, but within reason. Okay, and I see some shadow. There's just some halftone down at the bottom of this pear. It's going to be very tricky because it's quite colorful. I don't want to get that too gray, especially when it goes into the shadow, that halftone. I'm using a mixture there of the yellows, one of the yellow deeps in with that gray to give it a colorful turning point there as it goes into the shadow. You want to start with the largest brush and keep getting smaller as you go along. This area here bothered me a little, so I'm refining that shape somewhat. I see it could almost be two-fisted here. The shadow of that apple coming out a little bit there. Go over the edge of the apple. It was bothering me being a little bit sharp. Shadow color of that pear just ticks the end as it goes toward the lemon. Well, pretty much covered the canvas, and you always want to do your best to cover the canvas within the first half hour, especially one this size. You don't need to take much longer than that. You don't want to be so careful that you invest too much time initially and you're then afraid to make any structural changes later. I'm going around and softening some edges, checking the placement again just a little bit. And there was a nice fold of the drape up here that I think I'll put in now. It will help me. I feel a little unbalanced. I feel my painting's a little unbalanced. Now this will help, I think, fill that space. At least temporarily. And this corner is darker. That will help. The corner up above is darker too. Okay. We could spend lots of time on the background, modeling and so forth, but I really would like to get down to modeling some of these objects first. I think that orange comes in about there. I have a little bit of the background color mixed in with some of the orange color, and since the background is almost a complementary to the orange, it works well to gray that edge, so we don't have to use one of our neutrals. I'm adding cadmium red light, working from dark to light again, right here in this halftone area as the orange goes into light. And I see a little bit of it happening right there. Now, as the orange goes away from your eye, it's also going away from the light. So you would use a little of the cadmium red light and a gray near that to gray it, and that will give you the feeling that that orange is going away from the eye. As I go more toward the light source, I'm going back to my orange deep, putting a touch there. And as it gets toward the banana, it's picking up a little of that banana color. So I take a touch of the yellow deep and add there, along with the gray. And now we're modeling that orange. The local color of that orange is probably a cadmium orange, and it occurs right around the area where the highlight will hit. So I'm going to pick up some pure cadmium orange and lay it in right this particular point, not being too careful to blend. I'll leave the highlight until last. At this point, I will model the apple using all the 4 shades of red. I told you that that shadow was alizarin, and right next to it is cadmium red deep. Nice, bright, juicy colors. I see a little bit of it over here. Then we'll move up the scale. Cadmium red, medium. Put a touch of it. It seems that this side of the apple is a lot lighter. That's probably as it was growing, it hit the sun more. Now my cadmium red light in these areas. I want to drag a little of that color down into the area where we're going to see the stem coming out. All right, I think that next we should do something with this banana. I'm going to use a yellow deep and a corresponding gray and see if I can get that banana to look like it's turning away. Seems to do the trick. Add a tiny bit of cadmium orange. And those little flecks of brown sort of go together. And I'm using the orange deep and a neutral gray together to give that effect. And I'll just sort of use an uneven brush stroke there. Give the effect of those spots that occur naturally on a banana. The tip is quite dark, so I'll take a little black with one of the yellows. Medium, I think, will give it a greenish tinge, which is what happens at the end of a banana. I want to use a darker gray because the shadow is quite evident here. Now I'm going back with my background color and over a few edges here. It doesn't bother me if I pick up a little of the color of the object because to repeat that in the background is sort of a natural thing. It happens when you look at something. Your eye automatically causes that color of the object to give sort of an aura around itself. I wish the real lemon were smaller, but since it isn't, I'm going to arbitrarily just cut in a tiny bit for composition purposes. That's the nice thing about painting. It's differentiated from photography. You can control it, size and placement if you want to. Now on the lemon, since I'm at that point, I think I will deepen the shadow somewhat. It doesn't seem to be strong enough. I'll go with that cadmium orange and a corresponding gray for my shadow color on here. It's quite a dark shadow up in that area. Okay. I'll model the lemon. As you know, I used the yellow light as the basic general light color. So I'll drop then to the yellow medium and start placing it around the area where the light is going to hit. Go down to yellow deep, do the same thing a little bit further away. So you can see the gradual change there. And to the cadmium orange, just at the edge, and down this plane, and a bit here where the lemon turns. Something else bothering me is that background color, the shape of the pear, I think. I see it coming in more here. Back to the lemon. As this edge of the lemon goes away from the eye, it's still in a pretty strong plane of light, but it's going away slightly from the light source too. I'll be using cadmium yellow deep and the corresponding gray. And as you know, this gray is used at the edge of a color to make it appear that it's going off in the distance. Which should give me the effect of that edge just turning away from the light and from my eye. See a yellow deep right in here, coming this way. Now I'm going to put some yellow medium on this spot. To give that a little more modeling. Go back with my yellow light. Keep that area clean. I have some darker accents on the apple that I'd like to place. I'm going to go with alizarin and black. I see this happening right in here under the apple. And if I use that mixture with a little of the alizarin, I believe I can get the stronger shadow form that I'm missing right along this edge. Now that apple looks more round to me. I'm going to mix a little black with some of that cadmium red light to go in here. Because while this is happening on the tablecloth, it's still getting some reflected light from both, well, all the fruit is reflecting a little bit on that cloth. We'll mix a little black and phthalo green for that accent under the pear. You'll notice that I rarely use black straight from the tube. I generally mix it with another dark color like alizarin or phthalo or ultramarine blue. This keeps it rich. The exceptions, of course, would be the pupil of an eye or in the deepest shadow of black velvet drape or something like that. See, I haven't done too much modeling on the pear. A little of that local pear color and some yellow light and white brush that right in, not light side. I need a richer green than that, so I'm using yellow medium, and I'll touch some Viridian, see if that will solve my problem. Ooh, that does make it nice, nice pear color. Where it goes into shadow is a good deal darker than I have. So I'll mix a little phthalo green with the darkest gray. See if that won't do the trick. Lay it in right there. If you squint your eyes down, it almost goes to black in this little triangular shape here. That phthalo picks up in warmer color, so I've added a little yellow medium to it for this halftone area where it comes into light, from shadow into light. Now, apple, it has been bothering me. I have this little area too far down. I want to move it up. There. That's better. Now I'm going to try to unify this. This is a little picky, so we're going to make those areas swim together. That's all in the shadow, general shadow, and also with that orange. We'll find the edge again later, but it's a good idea to keep that fairly soft. Phthalo green is very strong, so beware when you use it. It has a tendency just to take over, but it's a nice rich color. Up at the end here. And another nub here. We have a stem coming out with a lighter portion. We have a colorful little nub in this orange. Let's look for reflected light on the objects. I see a very strong reflected light on the apple from the pear. It occurs right about here. I have some apple color on my brush, the shadow side, and I'm going to dip it into a little try. The pear is green. I think the reflected color would be almost a yellow deep. We'll try that, mixing it in with a little of the shadow color. That seems to do it. There's reflected light coming up from the cloth. And that cloth, as you recall, was a cerulean, a grade cerulean. So I'm going to try a little cerulean in the mixture and a little gray, place it right down here where that apple would pick up the color. Back to softening a couple of edges here and getting that pear shape refined. You should take a break every once in a while and stand back and check your work. In the interest of time, will continue on the march. I'm trying to turn that banana a little bit more, using my grays and a darker shade of orange. That seems to help it go back. Do the same, the little added green on the front here. At this point, you'll notice that I do jump around a little. Try to keep one color on the brush and look for various places to use it. Trying to find places where the objects are close in value to the background so that we can just sort of swim them together and get a nice painterly look to that. I think we can find a couple places like that. This one is already swimming around. What I haven't done is the orange reflected light from the apple. And it is a really dark, rich, because it's in the shadow. So you're having to go down to your value number 4 and the red there and place that right about here where that orange is sending off its reflected light. And the orange is picking up a little of the cerulean from the cloth right about in here. Matter of fact, the apple itself has a little touch of that cerulean right in here. And it's getting on the top edge of the apple from the drape that's reflecting in. We get a little cerulean edge. For this, I'm using the local color of the fruit plus a little of the gray or the drapery, the cerulean drapery color. Now I'm going to rapidly make a little more interesting background color here. I like the brush strokes to show. Work in from a little darker surrounding areas. And notice the shadow side of that lemon. It's going down a little darker than I have it. So I'm mixing a little of the lemon color with the darkest value gray. Might even have to go to black and go to orange. That gives me a better value, and it still retains that lemony color. Dip over there. Can soften this edge a little. Grade the lemon color. Give it that edge. That's better. Happier with that. I'm happier with that. Okay, let's try a few highlights. I'll use a fairly small brush for that. Pick up a 1. On the orange, your highlight is going to be not white, because the orange skin is a textured one. So if you went to pure white, you'd get the effect of a shiny surface. So I'm using a little yellow deep with the white, because the local color is bouncing around that highlight. So it wouldn't be, well, it would be a little lighter than that. We'll try another one with a little white in it. That's about right. I think I can go up a little bit more for my final highlight. Now the banana, let me go to a bigger brush, would be the yellow deep. That was the local color with white. Find just the right spot. It isn't too evident that there's a highlight on that banana, but if you squint your eye way down, you see that the light is striking it strongest right about in here. So if you add that stroke, you get more feeling of roundness on the banana. Then we'll jump to the pear and use a little local color of the pear that we mixed earlier, and white. Add white. And again, the pear skin is not completely smooth, so the highlight is going to have a little local color mixed in with it. The highlight comes just about there. The lemon, the same. It's a textured skin, so it isn't completely smooth. We take a little of that yellow light, mix it in with your white, dab it right where the light hits strongest on the lemon. Now, the apple, being more smooth skin, is getting more highlight. Before I put my highlight on, though, I think I should lighten that area a little bit. I'm using the cadmium red light mixed with one of the lighter grays just to make that form around the highlights. I think that will help. Now, you can use almost a pure white. Again, there is a tiny texture in that apple, so it isn't reflecting back pure white. I'm going to drop a tiny touch of cadmium red light in there. So when we apply this highlight here, there's one that comes right on this side, and save our big splashy one for right here. I think I would prefer to have only one highlight that bright. And as I said before, we're allowed artistic judgment, so I'm going to tone these down so they don't detract from our nice primary highlight, which is right there. The little nub on the end of the stem. I would say we have our bowl of fruit, or our fruit demonstration. Now let's see what it looks like in a frame. I could have continued painting, but it might have lost its freshness. Overworking often does that. We've covered quite a bit in a short time. A main topic was values, or the lightness or darkness of a color, and how to make an object recede by graying its edge or adding a little of the same value gray to the color. Another important point: when you're painting backgrounds, you need to mix a series of colors. 5 categories of light were covered: general light, general dark, halftone, accent, and highlights. And the use of all the colors, or hues, was demonstrated. All that's a lot to remember, I know. But oil painting is like any art form. Practice makes perfect. So keep painting.